Hey guys, tonight we're bundling up for something a little chillier than your ex's weird obsession with collecting spoons. The medieval ice age. That's right, the time when snowflakes were as common as houseflies, and your biggest worry was thawing out your frozen toes rather than what binge-worthy show to catch up on. Tonight's episode will make you feel grateful for your cozy blankets and the miracle of central heating, especially when you learn about dinner in this era. It's like a modern-day cooking show, but instead of a gourmet chef, you have a peasant with a rusty cauldron and zero hygiene standards. So, before you get too comfy, do me a solid, like the video, subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment to share where you're tuning in from and what bizarre hour it is for you. Seriously, someone must be listening at 3 AM from a very cozy bed in a castle or a hovel. Now, dim those lights, crank up that fan for a gentle breeze. Yes, even if it's cold outside. Make yourself comfortable and perhaps put on a medieval hat for effect. Let's take a moment to wonder. Ever thought about what life was like for a peasant when winter would drag on longer than your in-laws' vacation? What did they eat when it was too cold to grow plants? Did anyone ever actually wash their clothes, or did they just accept the smell as a part of daily life? What was it like working outside while being blasted by icy winds? And most importantly, how would you survive a day trapped in a hovel with all your awkward relatives? Now congratulations, you've just woken up in 13 or 15. Welcome to a nightmare filled with rodents, frostbite, and a daily ration of gruel that might or might not have been alive yesterday. You awaken to an ungodly racket that could make a banshee weep. It's the church bells announcing the dawn of another day in the medieval ice age. They've been ringing since the sun was a twinkle in your ancestors' eyes, and now you're expected to crawl out of a freezing bed that feels more like a block of ice than a mattress. How did sleeping arrangements turn into an endurance sport? Who knew morning routines could sound like a medieval torture chamber? You squint against the light that creepily filters through the thin gaps in your hovel's cracked walls. Interestingly, no one bothered to invest in any actual windows back then. What's the point, really? You might as well be sleeping in a cave. All that keeps you warm is a wool blanket that has absorbed so many odours over the years that you're pretty sure it could be independently denied as food in a court of law. It's sticky, sweet and sour like that summer barbecue that somehow went wrong but well before you were born. Not that you could ever afford barbecue, mind you. Those were for the nobles with fancy manners and food. You could only dream about biting into a juicy roast while you scrape remnants of something brown from a rusty bowl. Still, the bells insistently clang in a sound that is almost a comforting reminder of routine. You calculate the number of clangs. Typically, about 12 rings means it's around 6 o'clock, but with no one of sound mind around to regulate it, it could also mean 5 or 7, or that the town bothers to ring for no reason at all just to mess with you. Ah, medieval hospitality in full display. Your inner clock is more confused than a chicken trying to cross a road only to realise it's 12th century Ireland and not a modern-day poultry farm. You roll out of bed and test your extremities with caution, like a bad actor auditioning for a role in a tragedy. The cold floor is a mixture of straw and mud, unpleasantly gritty, and you can almost hear the discomfort echo through your mortal soul. Not even the mice, usually quite active at this hour, dare poke their heads out to witness your pain. Your knees creak like the moans of an old and weary ship, and every tiny ache brings you closer to your first existential crisis of the day. Ever try to get motivated when your joints remind you that age is merely a constant state of decay? Now it's time to brace for the wild world outside, a world where you're surrounded by more relatives than you can count, all equal partners in unending irritation and mediocre hygiene. Thanks to the delightful absence of personal space, you would happily trade your mattress made of hay for a proper little corner all to yourself. But no, here you are, packed like sardines, covering up the strange ensemble of body odours wafting from your unwashed family members. And collective hygiene? Let's not even consider bath time. Those delightful bathing rituals have turned into distant folklore, like the knights who saw no battle but still received glorious songs sung about their bravery every night. As you manage to butter your way through the herd, it's time to step outside. Congratulations, you're greeted by that lovely fresh morning air, a scent that's simultaneously crisper than a fresh apple, and more rancid than a stagnant swamp. Take a deep breath. It's free, and it'll prepare you for the next task at hand, breakfast. But first, endure the daily adventure that is squatting behind the hovel. Yes, that's right, no flowing lavatories here, no matter how many times you've wished for a nice porcelain seat. Just a bucket, an unbearable odour, and definitely no toilet paper. Let's get creative, shall we? Great. You survived another morning, and the smell of your own errors is almost comforting. Welcome back to the relentless business of living as a peasant during the medieval Ice Age, where your alarm clock often rings with the same comfort as a tolling bell ominously signalling the end, and in your case you're not too far off. You've managed to slip into yet another day of tedium and toil. Better put on your woolies as you head towards another round of delightful tasks, remembering that those unrelenting church bells were merely heralds of your never-ending struggles. Between the hunger pangs and monumental survival against the frost, you might find solace in the fact that you weren't alone in this. Everyone else bears witness to your daily grind, while they all seem to be equally unaware that they possibly resemble two mismatched socks left in the washing machine for far too long. If anything, maybe this is the moment when you forge the human connection through mutual suffering. Together yet apart in a swirling sea of medieval chaos, trudging onward while the dream of sun-soaked leisure lives rent-free in your mind. Keep moving, soldier, a new day has just begun. It's time to eat. But hold on. Breakfast in medieval Europe looks more like last week's leftovers dropped in a pot with some water and a sprinkle of anguish. Welcome to the world of pottage, a thick, lifeless stew that may or may not have contained actual food at this point. Does the smell resemble wet socks? You bet. Who needs avocado toast when you can start the day with a bowl of mystery mush that may continue evolving in the pot until the next ice age? As you sit down for breakfast, you brace yourself for the encounter with this culinary catastrophe. It's a miracle if you can even tell what's in it. Some squishy chunks could be potato, while others may have been confused with last season's gardening accident. Is that a carrot? Or is it just a sad piece of vegetable that once had dreams of grandeur before its descent into this bubbling cauldron of despair? You can't even be sure anymore. It's like someone put the entire fridge in a blender and forgot to hit the off button. And then there's the spoon. You did find one, right? It's a wooden relic, probably more splinters than the utensil at this point. As you dip into the pot, the texture resembles a thick glue that would have made your high school art teacher weep at the thought of it being used for a project. Chow down. It'll give you energy for those long hours in the fields. Energy that also might come with a side of dysentery if you aren't careful. But what about drinks? A steaming cup of the finest brew? Not quite. You're staring down a mug of weak ale. Yes, ale? At 6 Galg AM? Surely someone would need to warn you about the spiralling descent into a day fueled by fermented grains. You'd much rather sip on coffee, but, surprise, spoiler alert, coffee hasn't made its medieval debut yet. Instead, the water might as well have a warning label that reads, "May contain a dash of bacteria, a sprinkle of parasites, and enough mystery substances to leave you pondering your life choices. Cheers to hydration medieval style." As you munch and slurp your glorious breakfast of pottage, you can't help but wonder, Did mealtimes even matter back in the day? A question that lingers as long as the last bite sticks in your throat. A delightful reminder that breakfast in medieval Europe is profoundly not about indulgence or pleasure. It's about survival. You're not eating to satisfy the palate. You're merely fighting against starvation, and pottage is the reigning champion of blandness in pursuit of that goal. Now, if you think breakfast is all bad, don't forget about the inevitable aftermath. After struggling to finish that beige blob of non-joy, you wisely take a moment to evaluate your options for a proper clean-up. Spoiler, there aren't any. Contrary to modern standards, where a fragrant orange-scented cleaning spray is just a cupboard away, cleansing the cooking utensils will involve the gentle rinse of cold water, maybe a dab of earth, and a prayer to the cleaning gods that you won't get food poisoning from the last meal's remnants already growing a new ecosystem. Your meal leaves behind a pot as questionable as the shared identity of the ingredients. And the worst part, after breakfast comes the expectation of work. With your belly now feeling slightly violated and your palate still in shock from that unfortunate stew, it's time to actually grow your own food. So, the cycle continues. You've eaten your bowl of regret, and now it's off to plough fields, carrying the unrelenting burden of uncertainty as the cold bites at your fingers. But let's appreciate the absurdity for a moment. Here you are, hunched over in the fields with the greatness of pottage still coursing through your body, questioning all of life's choices every time you hear the growl of your stomach echo back in response. The harsh reality is that, amidst the darkest realm of dietary despair, you'll discover what it means to push through when popularity in breakfast cuisine is as stale as the bread left out since yesterday. And if you survive this morning meal, congratulations. You're one step closer to making it through the day. Plus, you'll always have the remarkable stories to tell, like how medieval pottage is the original comfort food, but only if your stomach is tough enough to handle the truth. So there you have it. A true breakfast of champions for the well-cooked and woefully unseasoned life of a medieval peasant. And with that warm, sluggish feeling in your gut, be assured that the adventure of hurling against the odds is only beginning. As the day unfolds, it's all about to get a lot stranger from here. Let's talk wardrobe, if you can call it that. You've firmly landed in the realm of scratchy wool and one reliable outfit. Perhaps you've heard of fashion. Well, medieval peasants definitely haven't, unless you define it as an ongoing series of poor choices and mildewy fabric. Here you are, dressed in layers that could double as insulation for an igloo. Who knew you could wear your entire wardrobe for weeks without a single wash? But in this age, personal hygiene and cleanliness were merely suggestions, kind of like a maybe when your friend invites you to a party. You know you should care, but well, it's just too much effort. Your one and only wool tunic, a marvellous blend of itchy and itchy, is all you have to get you through these bitter, endless winters. You remember the joy of slipping into your trusty outfit each morning, a ritual that resembles putting on a mummy's bandage. The first layer is about as flattering as a potato sack, while the second layer channels a confused llama. Really, if you could get any more fashionable, you'd probably change to wearing one of those actually fashionable creatures. But no, instead, you've got the privilege of breathing life into this ancient textile that could probably own a museum exhibit by now. It might even get featured alongside the history of cold climate struggles. Just imagine the ceremonial dance of putting this tunic on every day. First, a prayer to the gods of warmth that it doesn't smell worse than a week-old fish. Next, you gently slide into the sleeves, each tug feeling like a minor yet painful expedition. This woolly wonder was once worn by someone who probably died of frostbite 3 winters ago. The smell speaks volumes. As your fingers encounter the fabric, you realise it seems alive with the collective spirit of every person who has worn it before. Oh, the riveting history embedded in those fibres. What's truly a marvel is that this single tunic serves multiple purposes. It's a body warmer, a fashion statement in the land of "what's that smell?" and a ready-made picnic blanket when the snow hits hard enough to make the ground unapproachable. Feeling cold? Just fluff it up a bit. It's like wrapping yourself in a sheep that's been saving up its fur for quite some time, and if you happen to spill something on it, great news. You just added character to your long-term investment of wool. Now, on particularly grim days when you feel as though your body is slowly becoming one with winter, you learn how to layer effectively. A skill akin to packing for a trip to the North Pole. Wool undergarments, check. Gritty wool tunic, double check. And now, for the ultimate addition, some sort of headwear that looks like a half-melted potato but functions heroically, shielding you from both frostbite and eye rolls from your compatriots. However, let's not forget the real kicker. Soaking this lovely outfit in world-famous unfiltered rainwater for a week straight does wonders to amplify all those delightful odours. Your best bet? Steer clear of close company. Maybe that's where the medieval practice of social distancing originated. Picture this. You're sitting in the local tavern chatting about the weather or lack thereof, and the moment someone catches a whiff, suddenly the room diverts its gaze to the floor, desperately studying the arrangement of the straw as if it held the secrets of the universe. But amidst these absurd challenges there's a twist of irony. Here you are, cloaked in this image of survival, while your neighbours may prefer the fresh tunic look, but possess less spiritual fortitude in facing the elements. They might actually have separate outfits. Who do they think they are? Fashionable people in the Middle Ages? So, as you trudge through this attire day after day, you start to develop a bizarre kind of admiration for it. This raggedy garment has become a symbol of resilience, a badge of honour for surviving the brutality of the elements, and a constant reminder that yes, you really can wear something for way too long, even if you don't want to admit it in polite company. And let's be honest, when it comes to choices that filled life during the medieval Ice Age, you're pretty certain the wool tunic tops the list of things I never wanted to do, but somehow find myself doing regularly. At this point, you start to understand why the days felt so shockingly long. It's not just the bitter cold outside, it's the same layer of wool encasing all of your existential dread that makes you feel even more sluggish than you did before that peculiar fashion show began. Ah, the medieval world, so full of froze pitfalls. But don't worry, there's still more to embody here as you march down the ice rut of a wardrobe that defies all notions of comfort. Wonderfully, you begin to suspect your poor wardrobe is telling a story all of its own, resembling a medieval life of grit, survival, and possibly one too many cold nights. So, here's to the wool. May your itchiness remind you of resilience, your fabric layers remind you of the ongoing struggle of the living, and your shoulder seams remind you that sometimes life just has to be bearable, even if it's wrapped in scratchy, outdated fabric. Now, who could have imagined clothing held such power? Warmth and fashion, medieval style. It's a bold statement that's as bold as you'd want to remain. Toasty in spirit, if not in style. Time to slave away. You're a peasant, and your job description reads as follows. Toil in the fields from sun-up to sundown with the hope you don't die from frostbite or sheer exhaustion. Your tools? A rusty hoe and your own unsightly misery. What's the work-life balance like? More like work-life death sentence. But at least you can ponder that existential dread as you're shoveling away frozen earth while your back attempts to go on strike. Day after day you crawl out of bed, or rather the medieval interpretation of a half haystack with bed bugs, and trudge over to the fields, which are less bountiful crops and more muddy disaster zones. The morning air bites at your skin, a cruel reminder that you're not just working your field, you're fighting nature itself. As you grasp that broken hoe, you can't help but wonder, How many times has this pathetic excuse for a tool contributed to a back injury, or, worse, an impromptu burial at the local churchyard? Each swing mimics a death knell while your neighbours moan in shared agony. This isn't agriculture, it's community suffering. The livestock blissfully munching grass nearby share a look that simply says, "Thank goodness we're not the ones doing the heavy lifting, and let's address your attire, simply marvellous." You're adorning the finest collection of dirt, mud, and a rather special blend of sweat and despair. Ah, that wool tunic. Scratchy enough to remind you that personal hygiene is a luxury you simply can't afford. Modern fashion magazines would kill for the avant-garde look you've perfected, but alas, you're more runway model in a dumpster than anything with actual style. You can almost hear the whispers of the nobility calling your fashion choices chic as they ride past on their perfectly aligned horses, decked out in velvet and feathered hats. Meanwhile, it would take quite a few generating coats just to keep you from looking like a sad scarecrow after a rough night of very poor decisions. As lunchtime rolls around, you realise your stomach's been grumbling louder than a tournament crowd. Lunch? Oh, you mean your lunch of, wait for it, more pottage? And this time it's cold because you spent all morning in the field and your kitchen is just a stone slab with a fire that barely warms the air around it. You slurp down a bowl of something that could probably convince you you're in a culinary horror film. One glimpse reveals it might have once contained actual food, but now it's an unrecognisable broth seeping through the bottom of your bowl. That would be called vintage pottage in modern culinary lingo. And amid the squelches of mud and the melodic sound of your own body rebelling against every task, thoughts drift to your social life. Yearning for camaraderie over a shared meal becomes a quest akin to searching for the Holy Grail. You and your fellow peasants exchange pathetic glances as you recount the laborious saga of the most arduous tasks of the day. So how many acres of ice did you plough today, Bob? Just enough to wrap myself in a comfortable blanket of bitter frustration. The empathy is palpable, though underlined by the realisation that each moment spent in your hovel is yet another chance to contract every illness this side of the Black Death. Then there are the accidental hazards that come with back-breaking, frost-encrusted farming. Rogue horses with attitudes, sharp rocks that double as your personal nemeses, and occasionally other peasants who have taken it upon themselves to ensure your hard-won prospects aren't as prosperous as theirs. Who knew that your local community could bring as much joy as a public execution? Oh, the irony! It's almost poetic. And as the sun slowly dips below the horizon, painting a murky canvas of orange and grey, you plod back home, weary but still somehow hopeful that tomorrow might bring better weather, or at least less back pain. You contemplate how many more frozen days lie ahead, armed only with that rusty hoe and your dreams of a life less burdensome. Today, you weren't just a farmer, you were an unsung hero, battling the daily demands of mediocrity, while the world around you continued obliviously towards its own doom. So, as you collapse onto your straw mattress, a shabby excuse for a bed, you can smile faintly at the absurdity of it all. You survived another day, and though winter's grip still tightens, you've become somewhat of an expert in the fine art of misery management. After all, if laughter is the best medicine, absurdity must be the treatment for everything else, and in that spirit you allow your eyelids to droop, welcoming the dream of a life at least a little less frozen. Tonight, you'll dream of green fields and perhaps a potato that actually tastes like something, and who knows? You might even wake up to a brighter, warmer tomorrow. Let's take a quick detour to your resting place. You know, the one that's more a horror show than a bathroom. There's no privacy, no toilet paper, and the facilities are essentially a pit behind the house. Care to hold your breath as you balance acts of nature and humanity in front of disgruntled farm animals? Guardiloo, they say, but let's be real. You may as well be tossing your dignity out the window along with yesterday's dinner. Welcome to the medieval sanitation system, or as it should rightly be called, an invitation to tragedy. Now, let's imagine the scene. You lace up your woolen cloak, head out into the frigid air, and march determinedly toward the designated bathing area, if you can call it that. And what do you find? An earthen pit lined with unfortunate memories and a couple of suspicious-looking twigs for, shall we say, support. And you thought your bathroom back home was cramped. This is a communal affair, with the entire family and half the neighbourhood arguably sharing their business under the same roof. So much for privacy. You could hear the faint whispers of your relatives discussing last night's supper, or wondering who forgot to feed the chickens while you sit resolutely on your throne of despair. Not to mention the decor, if you could even call it that. We'd be doing a disservice to call this place decorated, because honestly, most of the art consists of flies dancing around a rancid layer of odour and dried grass. It's not inspiring much decor stamping as you attempt to negotiate your way through what can only be described as medieval plumbing malfunction. Is it too much to ask for a little ambience? Maybe a scented candle? You'd like to light a torch to the experience, but it runs the risk of introducing an entire new kind of disaster. And what about those toilet paper alternatives that humankind had to endure? Imagine wiping with leaves that could very well be mistaken for poison ivy or a frayed piece of wool, which raises the question, were our medieval ancestors all part-time dermatologists? Despite what you've heard, wiping with straw or a ragged piece of cloth isn't as convenient as one might hope. Lack of moisture and a cheerful sense of dread make sure your behind is more than a little distressed on most days. Ever tried explaining to a passerby that the reason your pants are ill-fitted is due to an accidental choice of green leafy plant instead of the more practical option? When it comes to etiquette, things really take a turn for the absurd. You don't just pop into the bathroom when nature beckons. It's more like entering a battleground. First, you must announce yourself. Guardiloo signals your impending release, just in case neighbours give the chamber pot a toss into the streets, where horror reigns supreme. This practice is known as defenestration, when, in the medieval sense, it's hopeful at best that someone will hear and move out of the way. Spoiler alert, they don't. For those who fancy themselves lucky enough to live in a castle, you might think you've upgraded to royalty. Surprise! You might have access to an ordinary hole perched above a moat. Yes, a guard robe, as it's infamously known, serves as your throne, a peculiar chamber that requires some caution when nature calls. Behind those mighty stone walls lurk not only your enemies seeking to invade, but also your own designs for survival. A consistent dread of wind blowing the right way. Who knew nature could serve double duty as both murder and a biological hazard? Beyond this theme of danger lies an essential truth about medieval life. You have to muster the courage to face the horror every single time. Modern conveniences have allowed you to forget about the routine discomfort, while back then it was simply part of the peasant package deal. You learn to be a quick thinker, adept at negotiating horrendous situations that modern city dwellers can hardly fathom. So as you stumble back into your hovel after a hasty encounter with the pit of doom, you might just pause and feel gratitude for indoor plumbing, toilet paper, and the miraculous invention of continuous flushing. Sure, it may seem trivial today, but next time you jog to the bathroom in a modest panic, remember, your ancestors traded comfort for a shovel and a desperate shout to any nearby poultry. After all, life in medieval times often proved to be a battle of endurance and a testament to survival, emphasising that when it comes to sanitary flexibility, You could literally say they had no backup plans. The experience, while horrifying, was one of resilience in the face of disgraceful dumpy days, forging stories you can hardly reconcile with the comforts of modern life. You've survived the morning, and now you're itching for a bath. Only what's bathing in the age of frigid tanks? Imagine lugging water from a cold well, praying it doesn't freeze before you add it to a lukewarm tub. But the catch? Bathing is a health hazard. As you're perched on the edge of that freezing wooden tub, maybe just settle for an ice-cold splash as you sum up your attempts to stay clean while the lice decide who gets to ride on your shoulders today. First, you need to fetch that water, which itself is an expedition worthy of its own legend. Bundling up in every woolen scrap you can find, you trudge out into the yard. The moment you step outside, it's like a slap from a frozen fish. You're reminded that winter doesn't play nice. You lean over the well, bravely dipping an empty bucket into the icy depths, but the water is so cold that it feels like you're negotiating terms of surrender with the icy abyss. Ever tried lifting a bucket full of freezing water? It's like trying to lift your mood on a Monday morning, ruggedly difficult and likely to drown you in despair. Now, after successfully fumbles of untangling the rope and making a small scene in front of the neighbourhood's chickens, you're back inside. You pour that ice-cold water into the tub, vaguely hoping that somehow gravity will do you a solid and warm it up before you get in. But nope, you can almost hear the water chuckle back at you. You expected warmth? Think again. I'm here to reinforce your misery. You fill the tub about halfway before realising, to your dismay, that it's still a far cry from what they call tepid. Not to mention the tub is a wooden marvel that looks more like a medieval torture device than a means of refreshment. Where's the comfort? There's no soothing scented oils here, only the sharp scent of wood, possibly mould, and the grim reminder that the last time this tub saw soap was the year the last dinosaur graced the earth. Now that you've done the essential work, you're left with the last obstacle, actually taking the plunge. Or, considering the condition of that water, perhaps the dip would be more suitable. Clenching your teeth, you brace yourself and step into the tub. The moment your toes touch the surface, an involuntary yelp escapes your lips, a sound you'll chalk up to being brave in the face of adversity. Meanwhile, you're silently bargaining with yourself. Okay, I can endure this for at least 3 seconds? Yes, 3 seconds should be good. So, you lower yourself gradually, inch by cold inch, until your entire body is submerged in a bath that feels more like a grave for your warm ambitions than a place of cleansing. Just as you settle in, you're quick to realise that no modern defence against frostbite exists. This icy cocoon merely invites a new batch of goosebumps to form with every second. Your head swims with thoughts about how your ancestors considered this torture to be a civilizing ritual. Civilizing? It feels more like the end of civilization itself as you gasp from the icy assault. Just when you're about to give up and accept defeat, you recollect that the medieval world wasn't all doom and gloom. Luckily, your village is at least vibrant with sounds as you sit there submerged like a live meatball. Perhaps you can focus on the chatter from the neighbours, or the distant clucking of chickens, thus distracting you from the biting cold nipping at your behind. Bathing was a social affair back then, perhaps the most social you might get compared to the rest of your frozen existence. After all, what's better than bathing with several family members crammed in a tiny space, chattering about last year's harvest failure and swapping fungus treatments? Eventually you summon that brave bit of courage, standing up to face the bitter chill that comes with air contact, a shockwave of regret and embarrassment flooding your system. Congratulations, you've survived a medieval bath. You're now officially a monument to poor life choices, and it's enough to make you contemplate whether you should just stay filthy and avoid the hassle altogether. As you gingerly step out, dripping with tiny icicles of self-loathing, you realise that maybe being clean is overrated, and stinking like a goat herd wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. After all, you've escaped one form of horror only to arrive at another. Is cleanliness really next to godliness? Or just another form of self-torture in a world that's essentially frozen in time? One last glance in the wooden mirror reveals a new soul, one caked in ice and self-resolve, now ready to take on the rest of the day, lice riding high and smelling just like yesterday's stewed rat. Welcome to the medieval Ice Age, folks, where cleanliness is a distant dream and your bath experience doubles as the ultimate test of resilience. Winter, when it feels like you owe an apology to the sun for whatever it did to anger him. The frost bites at every inch of exposed skin while you contemplate why humanity ever decided living in the medieval countryside was a good idea. You might consider a comforting bowl of soup, but alas, that's frozen solid too. How do you cope? Lots of layers and a relentless series of complaints to the neighbours about that time it snowed in July. You peer out the window, and the landscape greets you with a cruel white blanket that seems determined to suffocate any hope you had for warmth. Ever tried shoveling snow with a rusty spade? Not only is it a workout that would leave even the most dedicated gym-goer quivering in defeat, but when you're done, you're not feeling like a champion. You're left with the same cold, wet wool in those so-called clothes, feeling like an ice cube dressed up for a fashion show. Walking out to the fields becomes a game of will I slip and break my neck, or will I survive to freeze another day? Spoiler, both options involve considerable pain. Speaking of frostbite, let's not forget that sadistic little chuckle coming from your toes, gloating at how they're now akin to icicles. Sure, winter might be great for snowball fights that end in tears and frostbitten noses, but staying warm is a year-round endeavour that medieval people like you just can't escape. Forget about central heating or space heaters. Your room might as well be a cave. The walls made of stone don't just chill the air, they steel your will to live just a tad bit faster. So there you are, huddled around the fire you barely managed to make. Because remember, wood is as precious as gold during winter. The flickering light cheers you briefly until you realise it's doing little to warm the rest of the house. Your cheeks are pinker than your neighbour's prize pig, and your hands are so cold you start to question whether you'll ever feel anything other than exhaustion and chill again. And can we pause for a moment to talk about the smell? Yes, the delightful aroma of unwashed bodies mingling with livestock and last week's turnip stew. Who needs essential oils for relaxation when you have a smorgasbord of medieval stench wafting through the air? To make matters worse, the joy of food today typically consists of scavenging through a land of frozen vegetables, if you can remember where you stored them amid the rat's nest. You go searching, only to discover the last piece of food is now behaving like a block of ice. You could hammer a sword against it and maybe get some nice spear points out of it, or you could attempt the culinary art of chipping some off. If food doesn't actively want to kill you, is it even worth eating? And hooray for social gatherings. Wintertime means communal gatherings in your hovel, where, despite the relentless lack of personal space, you can enjoy good old-fashioned backstabbing and gossip with your neighbours. "No, Agnes, I swear the cow delivered ice cream last week." It's just one option for keeping the conversation lively. Martha can't keep her goat sufficiently clothed on cold nights. The poor little dears looked like ruffled feathers in a snowstorm yesterday. Humour is the only weapon left against winter's grip. Keep the talks peppered with absurd stories, and you might just ignore the creeping sensation that you're turning into an icicle yourself. Even the animals know it's a rough season. You poke your head out to witness the chickens squawking, flapping about like they're practicing for a poultry ballet, or a marvellous chicken-inspired research project, how to make frostbitten chickens last one day longer, They fiercely hold their ground against the freezing gusts while looking at you as if you're the one to blame for their misery. Really, it's hard to argue with them when your fingers are just as frozen as their feathers. So as the sun barely rises and sets behind a thick veil of clouds, and you find yourself adding another layer to your already comically large outfit battalion, remember this: even in the darkest, coldest days of winter, with frozen soup, icicle toes, and a whole reimaginings of cozy family interaction, you're living through an age that requires resilience and, more importantly, a hearty sense of humour. Because in the face of such relentless frost, if you can't laugh, it's likely a dire warning that the Ice Age has already won. Venture out into the icy hell of a food market where you encounter everything from frozen potatoes to whatever unfortunate animal your neighbour may have caught. How do you choose your groceries? Do you use your nose, ears, or even gut feelings? Because by this point, you're pretty sure something rotting may just be breakfast tomorrow. The air is thick with desperation and the unmistakable musk of animals and, frankly, questionable hygiene. Holding onto your scarf as tightly as possible, you try to mentally prepare yourself for the great food competition that awaits: scavenging. Picture this. The vendors are half-heartedly yelling in thick accents about last week's turnips and dubious-looking fish, which may or may not have been plucked out of a muddy creek 5 winters ago. You stop to inspect a charming bucket of mystery soup, the kind that glistens with secrets best left unknown. Was that a rat's foot you just spotted? Perhaps that's the taste sensation everyone's been missing. As you shuffle through the ice-blanketed stalls, you realise that making choices at the market is less about calories and more about survival. Your shopping list is practically blank because you've learned long ago that dinner is an ongoing mystery, potentially laced with hazards worthy of a medieval horror film. 1 ounce of rat meat, you muse? Hey, could be worse. After all, the last time you broke bread, it tasted like a soggy sock woven into hay. And what of bread itself? Navigating this labyrinth of dubious food options, you scan the horizon for one vendor who might offer something resembling nourishment. Armed with a few shillings, you ask for a loaf, only to receive what appears to be a near-solid hunk of rye that has the power to crack skulls. The vendor assures you that the bread is good for the soul and might make an excellent doorstop in a pinch. When it's your turn, you reluctantly hand over the coins and accept your fate, not unlike a soldier preparing for battle with questionable armour. Next, on your adventure, you spot a stall overflowing with frozen vegetables, though overflowing might be generous when half of them are frozen solid in a block of ice that could double as an abandoned glacier. As you inspect a carrot, you realise it's less a carrot and more a pale approximation of a carrot that has clearly seen better days. It lifts your spirits slightly because you could always use it as a potential weapon if rabid chickens come after you later. Feeling adventurous, you move on. You hear laughter from a gaggle of raucous children passing by, with something that resembles meat in a burlap sack. Thinking they might have stumbled into a jackpot, you sidle up and get a glimpse of the contents, a haphazard mix of animal parts that might never have been identified by forensic scientists. Noble feasting indeed, you snicker to yourself, hoping it won't end up in your serving bowl tonight. Fate has an odd sense of humour because just around the corner is an even more questionable sight. A vendor trying to sell a pair of fish. For the reasonable price of half a day's wages, you could be the proud owner of 2 eyesores that smell like they may have once partied too hard with the turnips. Desperate to source some semblance of healthy protein, you consider the opportunity before dismissively passing. It's not worth a side order of vomiting later. Thank you very much. As you continue rifling through this pee-wee bazaar of food, you notice stirring in an adjacent corner where a group of women prepare a stew that looks suspiciously like yesterday's leftovers reincarnated. Freshness is key, they chirp, stirring with wooden spoons that could easily be mistaken for medieval weapons. Perhaps today you'll barter for a taste. The hope of savoury scents drifts into your restorative dreams, until you realise it might be more akin to some lost cousin of gruel wearing a deflated crown of regret. Finally, your arms heavy with questionable bounty, you start shuffling back homeward, your heart torn between appreciation for the simplicity of life and the ever-looming dread of what you just bought. Life's richness isn't in prosperity. It's more like navigating through icy hell with frostbitten toes, pursuing sustenance through a marketplace where half the food won't survive until dinner. As you reach your door, you mentally count your losses and gains. A hunk of rye, 2 frozen vegetables and a sturdy crate. Your ingredients stand as a testament to the glory that awaits tonight's feast. A humble reflection of survival, disguised behind a layer of frosty determination. Welcome to your cosy hovel, peasant. The survival game in the medieval Ice Age has only just begun. Feeling a little frozen? It's time to gather firewood, but you must face the dangers of territorial squirrels and the occasional grizzly bear's brown-eyed stare while you scavenge for kindling. Warrior mode activated. You soon realise that not only do you need to fight off wildlife, but Mother Nature herself as she throws icy gusts in your face. And by the time you've collected that wood, you'll resemble a popsicle in wool garb. Ah, winter, a season full of wonders like snowmen and frostbite. But who really enjoys the view when you're literally fighting for warmth against icy winds that bite harder than your second cousin during family bingo night? As you cautiously venture into the woods, your first challenge will be navigating the labyrinth of berry bushes that are more akin to medieval torture devices. Forget the overgrown trails of a modern hike. This is an excursion through snarled branches and prickly thorns, each step met with a gentle reminder of why nature likely doesn't want you there. Those bushes will cling to your tunic as if trying to claim you as one of their own. Are you part of the flora now? You ponder this as your woolen garment becomes a makeshift wrestling opponent. While you're busy wrestling with the hedgerows, the wildlife is also out and about, keeping an eye on your antics. Yes, that's right. You're not just looking for firewood, you're in a game of survival with the local fauna. Squirrels watch your every move like they're judging your qualifications for some sort of woodland Olympics. Can you sense their tiny judgment? They're eyeing the dry leaves and twigs you're precariously attempting to hoard. You laugh nervously, forgetting that these tiny beasts are more prepared for winter than you will ever be. And let's be real. A crowd of angry squirrels could wipe the floor with you faster than you can say winter survival. After mastering the art of silent negotiation with furry critters, you might encounter a pair of bull-headed geese. These waddling harbingers of mischief have deemed this area as their territory, complete with noble honks and all the authority of a twitchy knight. Turn back, peasant, they seem to squawk. You understand the language of the gentlest beasts, but alas, your mission for firewood must proceed. You'll need to outsmart these waddling fiends on their own turf. Ever thought about how to outmaneuver geese? Well, you'll discover that stealth is not on your side either. As you slide behind the tree, one goose feigns detachment, but its buddy isn't fooled. And now the strange surreal mix between you and Mother Nature comes into play. The wind begins to howl like a direwolf from an old tale, mocking your valour as it sweeps past you with all the gentility of a jackhammer. Every gust feels like knives of ice tearing through that one wool tunic, your only line of defence, while your poorly constructed shoemaking leaves you moaning for more than just firewood. The earth is frozen beneath your feet, giving you the classic medieval reference of cold enough to freeze the jewels off a knight, if knights actually had jewels. Eventually, after what seems like hours, the battle royale against the elements rewards you with a modest but respectable hoard of firewood. You stand there triumphant, heart racing, arms filled with sticks, twigs, and the satisfaction of a job well done. But what's this? A sudden realization dawns on you. Staring at the pile of wood, you begin a soft chuckle. Your hard-earned prize isn't quite enough to kindle an epic evening by the fire, is it? If only heating didn't depend on breaking your back against the torment of nature, or worse, turning this entire expedition into an episode of Survivor, Medieval Edition. With much turmoil and grit, you haul your wooden prize back to the hovel, fully aware that clinging to warmth is an art form best mastered with multiple layers and an enduring spirit. As you enter, your family might cheer, mostly out of necessity rather than gratitude. Because let's face it, gathering firewood is merely your first course in today's banquet of suffering. The evening likely holds even more thrilling escapades and sadly even less heat. So there you stand, amidst your frozen comrades, anticipating the bittersweet warmth of a fire that almost isn't worth it at this point. Cheers. You would think that conversations over a sizzling stew would be delightful, a merry gathering, so to speak. But when did medieval socialising become a game of who can endure the smell better? As you huddle with fellow peasants, swapping tragic stories of frostbite and lost livestock, you'll realise that this gathering is more about surviving the night than sharing cosy banter by the fire. Imagine getting together in your cramped hovel, with walls that haven't seen a cleaning since the last ice age. Oh wait, that was last month. Combined sense of wet wool, body odour, and the ever-present whiff of what's that critter doing in here as filling the air. At least you have a fire, but let's be honest, it's more of a flicker than a warmth, casting long eerie shadows against the walls. You might feel a bit like a snack at a haunted bonfire, frozen and tantalisingly far from any real sense of comfort. As you try to speak above the crackling wood and your neighbour's cough that sounds suspiciously like a dying goose, you'll realise everyone's serious about carving out their space in this bonding experience. Because let's face it, surviving means playing nice. Sort of. Conversations meander around topics that spiral into despair as you talk about your pet pig that mysteriously vanished last week. Could the neighbour's stew have something to do with that? A polite laughter echoes around the hovel as everyone chokes down their bitterness, along with the last remnants of last night's dinner. No one really wants to admit that their livestock may have gone to that great pasture in the sky after becoming part of unfortunate culinary fates. It's like medieval table talk, the edition where the main course is emotional resilience with a side of grim acceptance. Now that the initial awkwardness is out of the way, conversations slide into the day-to-day grind of life as you all share how futile it is to keep warm at night, considering the freezing air whips every which way through the gaps in the walls. Well, I could pack my entire family into bed to stay warm, one brave soul comments, but then we'd also be sleeping on last week's pottage. As you subtly nod along, silently grateful that your family shared space in the evening, you suddenly understand. It's all about finding ways to avoid freezing, much like your will to live. But let's not forget the grand undercurrent of rivalry. Ah yes, medieval social life wouldn't be complete without comparing how much worse everyone's toil was, along with a really intense debate over who had the most successful vegetable patch, or rather, who made the biggest loss this season. The fine art of squabbling takes the form of competitive lamenting as phrases get bandied about like an Olympic sport. "Oh, Judith lost 10 cabbages this week," quickly gets a response like, "Pfft, she didn't even see half of mine go to mildew. It's like they conspired against me." The echo of pessimistic camaraderie reaches its peak, establishing essential friendships your ancestors would surely be proud to vouch for with the finest mead. As evening progresses, the conversations become tinged with surprise. You might glimpse Matthew, who's grown somewhat renowned for his storytelling abilities, standing dramatically in the corner, gesturing with wild abandon as he spins a yarn, half deer hunt, half horror story about the white cow of winter, which allegedly foils even the most daring folk. You and your companions lean in, sipping from bowls of weak ale that you can only hope will lend you courage against the nighttime horrors. Matthew might even convince your friend Alice to toss in the night's best scare tactics, reaffirming the importance of community and the need to staunch all feelings of terror that come hand in hand with being a medieval peasant. As the fire flickers and the night draws on, you begin to understand the thrill of local social life, the bonds formed in the grim realities of shared labour, losses, and uncertain futures. You know that you may stumble into comfortable friendships, even amid the stench of neglect, and mingle in a miserable camaraderie. By the time you beckon your way back to your family's little corner of the hovel, you realise that maybe, just maybe, resilience binds you together more than the loveliness of fragrances ever could. After a night like this, sleeping cold will feel far more endearing when layered in the warmth of belief that together you could face another day, with or without a missing pig, bumpy stories, or the occasional ghost of a lost livestock roaming around. Feel like you might die from the winter blues? Not to worry. Your medicinal choices are just as delightful as your breakfast. Leeches and herbal teas that taste like mouldy grass thrown together by a particularly disgruntled witch. Who needs a first aid kit when you have a wise monk at hand to track you down while chanting "No pain, no gain"? Welcome to the realm of medieval healthcare, where your remedy options aren't just limited but also shockingly bizarre. Let's start with the star player of the medieval medical cabinet, the leech. Yes, the very creature you typically scream in horror at if it wiggled its way onto your foot is actually your ticket to good health, allegedly. Doctors of the time believed that bloodletting was an essential remedy for nearly every ailment. Got a headache? Bloodletting. Feeling fatigued? Bloodletting. Dying from consumption? Bloodletting times 2. Honestly, they treated blood like a random substance to be shuffled around, all complete with their trusted leeches, bathing in the fluids of your misfortunes. One can imagine a medieval patient lying back as the doctor cheerfully comments, "Just a tiny incision, a little discomfort, but it's for your own good." It's almost comforting, isn't it? Well, until you realise that the last thing standing between you and total collapse is a couple of squiggly parasites. And that's if you're lucky enough to have a doctor who isn't just a barber who's had one too many iced ales before work. If you happen to be in a village where medical expertise equates to having a half-baked understanding of local fauna, you may find yourself enduring a unique take on healthcare. You may just find yourself sipping a concoction brewed from herbs that sound like they belong in a fairy tale. Think nettles, sneezewort, or maybe a little bit of henbane. Perfectly normal names for toxins that may or may not grant long-term health benefits. But hey, who's counting? As the wise herbalist rummages through her collection of dried roots and mouldy leaves, you begin to wonder if you'd rather chance a bit of frostbite than test your stomach's resolve with good-for-you potions that smell like damp caves. But fear not. If the herbal remedies don't do the trick, you still have the fantastic notion of trial by ordeal at your disposal. Got a nasty cold? How about dipping your hand in boiling water to see if it heals, proving you're either fortunate or entirely out of luck? The medieval medical equivalent of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger comes with the condition that you might just die in the process. Isn't that reassuring? You can even choose to be thrown into a lake. If you float, you're innocent. If you sink, well, let's just say you won't be preparing your own trials again. And speaking of lack of hygiene, let's talk about dental care, or lack thereof. If you reach a point in your life where you catch a glimpse of your reflection and notice that your smile looks like it belongs on a skeleton, you certainly won't be heading off to your local dentist for polishing. Instead, it's either chew on a twig or hope that swishing vinegar around helps you dodge a toothache. Of course, with the dental disaster brewing, it's not uncommon to find medieval folk inhaling their meals, cutting the bread with their remaining teeth. while silently weeping at the thought of a dental procedure. After all, who wouldn't want a root canal with medieval tools or a delightful surgery from your neighbourhood barber who moonlights as a tooth extractor? And finally, when it comes to those biting winter woes, let's not overlook the power of the quintessential medieval advice: thick wool socks and a warm beer. Because who doesn't warm their insides with a hearty drink while huddled next to a bonfire hoping for a miracle? Better to wallow in frostbite than to subject oneself to the constant grim treatment recommendations by doctors holding questionable qualifications. After all, a broken spirit can only be mended by the light of a good ale. So the next time you feel that winter chill creeping into your bones, remember that your medieval ancestors would have greeted it with a fistful of mouldy herbs, friendly leeches, and a noble sacrifice to prove their resilience. Because who needs comfort? What truly matters is making it through the season alive, even if the methods employed feel a bit more like a scene from a horror movie than a medical procedure. After all, life and death in the medieval era were part of the same wicked game, and everyone just hoped they wouldn't roll the dice too often on the wrong side. Let's take a break from your burdens and discuss horses. You need one for survival, work and companionship. Unfortunately, these steeds are more likely to be unreliable sledders than the gallant companions you may have imagined in your dreams. As they stomp their hooves impatiently in the biting cold, you'll contemplate why being a medieval cowpoke seemed like a good idea at the time. The truth? It's mostly just the romanticised image of galloping into the sunset like a dashing knight, not the frigid reality of riding a stubborn plough horse that refuses to go anywhere other than its favourite spot to munch on cold, frozen grass. Now, you might wonder about the selection process for these majestic beasts. Picture this. You head to the nearest market to find a horse. Here, you'll face an array of choices, each one equally unimpressive. You negotiate terms with a grizzled stall merchant who mistakenly believes that you'd be enchanted by the trotting pace of a horse named Sir Rides-a-Lot. A weak attempt at irony given his severe cases of lameness. You quickly realise that choosing a steed in the medieval world feels less like a noble venture and more like picking a partner for a three-legged race. You're both bound to trip over each other's feet along the way. Mounting the beast of burden is another exercise in humility. You hoist yourself onto its back, which can feel like a heroic feat until Sir Rides-a-Lot lets out a sound reminiscent of a pig trying to sing opera. Suddenly you're engaged in a game of will it buck every time you mount. A clumsy wobble sends you spiralling sideways off the saddle, landing in a snowdrift that's half mud, half frozen dignity. Who knew riding could feel more like an effort to reform a disgruntled potato than becoming a knight of old? But let's not forget about the relationship dynamic. You've got a love-hate bond with your horse, lovable when it's feeding time, hateful when you're begging it to stop sniffing the backside of that suspicious goat. Hey, Sir Rides-a-Lot, we're not here for animal social hour. The mountain of hay you've accidentally landed in doesn't help, of course. You've quite literally fallen into the role of pasture clown. Life as a peasant means you need that horse to help carry out essential tasks, like gathering firewood, hauling produce, or fetching manure. Can't wait for a hot date with Dolores the baker? Forget it. If your horse refuses to get out of its cosy, rot-ridden corner, you best believe Dolores will think you've ghosted her. And truly, no amount of enthusiastic carrot bribery will work if Sir Rides-a-Lot is set on becoming the king of complacency. This noble guise of companionship quickly fades under the weight of winter responsibilities. When it's time to harness Sir Rides-a-Lot for work, you'll learn a thing or two about teamwork. The first lesson: be prepared for negotiation. Look, pal, I promise there's a treat in it for you. Just please stop trying to nibble on that frozen fence post. You strap a bit of plasticity in a metal harness, a concept so foreign it feels like a medieval invention meant for a rather bad circus act. Every tug forward feels as though you're attempting to convince a pet rock to suddenly jump through hoops, and then comes the downpour of the storm. As winter quickly envelops the landscape with layers of frost, your bond with your horse is tested. Attempting to trot into the storm is significantly less romantic than riding off into the sunset. It's more akin to a freezing, disoriented stumble under dim streetlights, unsure if the horse is trying to hurl you off or just expecting a round of applause for its valiant effort. Oh, you magnificent beast! Why do the fates conspire against us both? Of course, perhaps the most important lesson you'll gain reflects a grim reality. Horses have their quirks, just like you. They can be temperamental, stubborn, and twice as silly, much like your relatives, who like to discuss your lack of a successful legacy while standing in the vacant hovel you share. One day, you're a brave knight, and the next it's a scene of you wrestling a giant draft horse while imagining the sweet release of hot wine instead of frosty hay. At the end of the day, riding through this unforgiving era can feel like a test of patience, rather than the exhilarating experience you'd hoped for. Every jolt and cold wind offers a reminder that even if the medieval world seems grand in literature, in reality, it's an exhausting and rather hilarious cycle of trying to get a poorly behaved horse to canter while you navigate doubt, hunger, and that lingering desire to be perfectly warm. With every frozen step and each awkward exchange with your noble steed, you'll be left contemplating whether you'll soon wear out your welcome, or kick off a truly ridiculous adventure in a snow-glugging escapade. Just another day living in your frosty medieval haven. Talk about Ice Age lows. Ever wondered about the social pecking order? Spoiler alert, it doesn't look pretty for you down at the bottom. You rank between rats and mouldy bread. While the nobles wine and dine in their stone castles with elaborate feasts, you're forced to huddle in your hovel, occasionally attempting to rise to the top, only to be smacked back down by the uncomfortable reminder that status means you get to eat yesterday's stew. In fact, your entire life is dictated by a hierarchy that's more rigid than a knight's armour, and just as likely to leave you feeling trapped. Now let's picture the nobles. They live in luxurious stone fortresses, where the closest they get to hardship is having to choose between veal or roasted peacock for dinner. Their chandeliers glisten like they're auditioning for a reality show, while you're facing the harsh reality of dining by candlelight, assuming the candle is still flickering after a month of use because they refuse to replace it. And what do they have to show for it? A bunch of land, titles that glow with prestige, and a revolving door of servants who, let's be honest, make even your bad hair days look like haute couture. As a peasant, you earn your bread, literally, by toiling in the fields while dodging the occasional goat that believes your shins are a chew toy. Meanwhile, the noble class sits high and mighty on their thrones, pondering such existential questions as, is it too late to chase the squirrels out of my grand dining hall? The closest you'll ever come to regality is being the first to spot the royal carriage rumbling by, and let me tell you, even that is a fleeting drug to your ego. So what does this hierarchy mean for you in day-to-day life? Let's start with the perks, or, rather, the distinct lack thereof. Nobles have their pick of the finest meats, cheeses and wines, while you're putting together a carefully curated menu of whatever still resembles edible food after a month in the icebox, if it wasn't a solid block of frozen despair. You're looking at a weekly stew that could inspire a new variety of cheese, one that you might not want to be acquainted with. After all, if it doesn't grow legs and start walking away, it's probably dinner. If your lord decides to throw a feast, you know he'll invite the adorable lords from surrounding areas and the entire gentry, leaving you wondering what sweet aroma of roasted animal is wafting in the air while you scrape the muck off your soggy crust of bread at home. Your excitement for the night's entertainment. Watching the weasel that calls your hovel home scamper under your haybed, while secretly plotting world dominance over whatever that half-eaten carrot is lying nearby. And naturally, with all this power comes their little friend, taxes. Taxes are like that clingy relative who won't take a hint. Every harvest season you'll watch your meagre crop yield slashed as the taxes, imposed by those esteemed nobles, take a hearty bite right out of your produce. After you sell your barley and deliver what little cash you'll see, don't think of spending anything on niceties. After all, sweet treats are for the lucky ones, those who don't have to pray for their children not to fall ill from a mysterious ailment that may result in their not surviving past age 5. But let's not just heap the misery on peasants. You'll find that even among the affluent classes, the nobles have their share of troubles. Backstabbing and betrayal run rampant amongst their ranks. Have you ever seen an aristocrat looking over their shoulder? You'd think a simple game of chess has devolved into a family feud over the last crumb of bread. With marriages being arranged to curry favour instead of love, it's as if their thoughts go something like this. Do I love my spouse? No, but they did bring me a direct land claim, so that's a solid yes to marital joy. And for those unfortunate enough to fall out of favour, good luck. They're relegated to a life of relentless gossip and potential accidents. You know, like a horse taking a shortcut right off a cliff. Yes, in this societal hierarchy, envy runs wild, and loyalty can be as fragile as the last hunk of your turnip stew. So there it is, your summary motive wrapped in a cosy blanket of longing for a noble life that likely isn't set up for success either. As for today, stick it out in your hovel under the gnawing ceiling and hold on to the hope that one day you might get a loaf that isn't solid enough to double as a projectile. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where royals have it rough, peasants have it rougher, and you might just learn to celebrate mediocre bread for breakfast, because that's what keeps the cycle of misery alive. Let's delve into family matters. You thought living with a few roommates in a cramped apartment was tough? Try sharing a one-room hovel with your siblings, a goat, and possibly Uncle Dirk who never left. You'll soon learn that privacy isn't just a luxury, it's a myth, and family bonding means sharing everything, even lice. Imagine this. You wake up at the crack of dawn with that one annoying cousin snoring inches from your head, while the family goat chews contentedly at what passes for your makeshift furniture. Let's face it, if you thought you had personal space issues, this is a whole new level of intimacy. Your home is an intimate hovel with wooden walls that creak louder than your Aunt Gertrude's knees when she tries to stand. There's one tiny window that, if you peek through, reveals the same muddy street you've seen every day of your life. Let's call it a splendid view of monotony. And while you and your siblings might wonder if it's possible to develop telepathic communication as a coping mechanism, you'll find that any semblance of me time vanishes faster than last night's porridge. But hey, it's not just about getting through winter days together in a frigid hut. Ultimately, it's about survival in a world that feels determined to eradicate your very existence. This grouping of relatives creates a hustle and bustle that could rival a market on a good day. You become both sibling and surrogate parent, each task requiring your innate ability to juggle bickering kids like a one-person circus. "You broke my toy," cries one tiny voice, while another chimes in with, "Stop touching my hair." Will they ever learn that pointing fingers in a hovel is just a guaranteed riot among your fellow occupants? Ah, chores! Each morning begins with a chore chart that looks more like an elaborate family conflict waiting to happen. Taking turns fetching water from the well at dawn? That's one way to cultivate patience, or perhaps cultivate the deep-rooted desire to become a hermit and live alone forever. But breaking news, none of your family members would ever be so kind as to let you abandon your duty. Now, let's shift our attention to the legendary family meetings that you can't escape even if you wanted to. Gathering everyone for a discussion sounds innocent enough, until you find yourself in a cacophony of voices arguing about whether last week's rat infestation was your fault, or if Uncle Dirk should be the family's official rat catcher, clearly a role he vehemently dodges each time. You dismiss any thoughts of diplomacy as you witness the gravity of this disaster. How does one broach the topic of shared labour with people under the same roof who are unremarkably unwilling to assist? Families in the medieval Ice Age are always dealing with this chaotic dance of survival, and yet, somewhere amidst the fracas there comes a deep connection, a bond forged through shared miseries and the ability to withstand winter. The hovel breathes with laughter and tears, bluntly teaching you the vital lesson that life is miserable, but sharing that misery makes it somehow less unbearable. After all, who else would understand the pain of eating a single day-old loaf of bread and discussing it passionately at dinner? Speaking of dinner, let's not forget that family meals are an entirely different circle of hell. Cherished moments spent huddled around a cauldron of pottage, where you've perfected the art of subtly, not so subtly, avoiding your older siblings' habit of double dipping. Don't worry about the louse in the soup, says Grandma reassuringly. Think of it as an extra source of protein. Thus, not only are you sharing a roof, but you're also sharing culinary delights that the modern world might simply call dare to consume. Through it all, the constant buzz of personalities, the never-ending chatter, the sometimes nauseating family bonding moments, there is a deep love residing within that crowded hovel. Because at the end of the day, every squabble over chores is fueled by a connection that carries you through centuries of hardship. Somewhere in the heart of that medieval ice and familial cacophony is the kind of warmth that can make even the dreariest winter bearable. You might not have personal space, but you'll never want for companionship. And in a world far harsher than a cramped hovel, that's something to be grateful for. So, toast to family living, where everyone smells like wet sheep, shares secrets louder than a town crier, and if the worst comes to pass, well, at least they're the only lot you'd ever consider sharing a wool blanket with in a blizzard. When it comes to holidays, you'll find they're not so much festive as they are just different shades of sorrow. For peasants, this means celebrating with the same grim food, frigid weather, and back-breaking labour. Sure, there's a church service thrown in, but really, what's a little extra suffering among family, right? The holiday cheer that today's world likes to parade around is replaced by a biting wind that feels remarkably like a cold slap to your face just as you step outside, ready to face another day of labour. Let's say it's the Feast of St. Whatever, a day supposedly dedicated to joy and merriment, a fact that must have been particularly lost on your shoulders, which feel like they're about to implore the Lord for some mercy after hours of ploughing frozen land. You gather with your family, and what do you have to eat? A filth-encrusted bowl of pottage that has been simmering since the last ice age, sprinkled with a few pitiful root vegetables that might still be fighting for their lives. If you're lucky, you might score a piece of slightly tougher bread, more akin to a medieval projectile than an actual food item. Best feast day ever, you think sarcastically as you delicately negotiate your way through the loaf that's less about deliciousness and more about fortitude. Afterward you head off to church for the obligatory service. The church bells ring louder than your hangry stomach, signalling the start of a mass that will feel more like a prolonged punishment than a communal celebration. You stand shoulder to shoulder with your neighbours, all of you managing to produce an impressive aroma from a lack of proper washing. And hey, why would anyone bathe when showing up at the church is considered the height of civic duty? As the priest drones on about your sins again, you can't help but wonder if a word about your pitiful dinner would have been a nice addition. At least folks could bond over their collective grievances instead of pretending like the church drip fed you any form of relief from your bleak existence. But what about the games, the joy of the season? Well, pull up a chair if you can find one among the goats, chickens, and an overabundance of winter jackets. Instead of exciting festivities with music and laughter, you're graced with the yearly tradition of stumbling around the house while trying to avoid stepping on the ridiculously strong-pooping poultry. It's as if the chickens take turns strategizing on how to maximize the joy of your holiday, leaving behind little landmines for you to navigate as you try to carry carrion to the eldest son's corner, where his idea of joy is more about complaining about the lack of cheese than anything resembling happiness. Of course, no feast day is complete without a round of storytelling. These are usually tales that haven't changed much since the last ice age, riddled with deadly nincompoops and divine interruptions. Your great-uncle once knocked a man out for eating too many dried pies at Christmas. Was it revenge? You still aren't sure. Half the family is probably repeating the same myths by now. Every aunt and uncle uses these stories as a warning. Don't be like Uncle Henry, who met his end by tangling with a boar over a damaged ale barrel. Better sit up straight and take in your miserable servings, children. Yes, nothing warms the heart like fear-induced storytelling wrapped in frostbite. As the day wears on, the fatigue in your bones becomes more pronounced, and you feel less like celebrating and more like surviving the inevitable winter blues. You wrap your wool tunic tighter around your body, not that it helps, hoping for a miracle, that tomorrow's ploughing might yield something beyond sheer dread. So much for revelry. You head back to your hovel with stomachs grumbling louder than church bells, and the knowledge that tomorrow is simply more of the same minus the excessive misery of pretending to enjoy your day off. And once the celebrations do come to an end, the real lesson kicks in. The struggle to survive dwarfs any tales of romance or joy from long ago. So, as you crawl back into your frigid straw mattress for a night filled with desperate tossing and turning, contemplating the fate of your oddly shaped potatoes and stale bread, remember this. Holidays are less about joy in medieval times and more about surviving just a bit more frost, making it through the night and finding a semblance of human connection, even within the layered grime of reality. Ah, the holidays, a delightful prolonged reminder that life in the medieval ice age is decidedly not for the faint of heart, or anyone with aspirations of what a celebration should be. In essence, it's all just practice for the ongoing play that is life, an incessant tale of survival masked by the flimsy shrouds of festivities that disappear quicker than your cousin's last potato. Romance in the 14th century, greeted by crossed eyes and questionable intentions. With matchmaking often resulting in forced unions, you may find yourself longing for the freedom to woo instead of being traded off like livestock during a market sale. Your prospects aren't exactly stellar, not unless you count the neighbour's goat. Imagine for a moment you're hopeful, yet you find yourself facing a long line of potential suitors who make your cousin's toenail fungus look appealing by comparison. You might think finding love in medieval England would be a romantic adventure, lavish feasts, soft music, candlelit conversations. Instead, it resembles a tragic comedy, where your best shot at courtship involves peeking at your crush from behind a haystack while trying to avoid the livestock. The reality is gruesome. Roses are replaced with horrendous union contracts that your parents wrote during a particularly poor decision-making moment. Say you step forward, perhaps stunningly dressed in the finest, albeit damp wool tunic. Flirting. Forget it. The thought of stealing a glance is daunting, as you risk tripping over your own shoelaces or literally stumbling into a metaphorical pit of despair. Or worse, a cow patty. And even if you happen to catch the eye of a dashing lad or lass with half-decent hygiene, what happens next? Will they sweep you off your feet or merely trip over them? Let's not even get into the awkward meet the parents moment. You wade through endless conversations about land rights and livestock health, while your potential suitor awkwardly tries to save face, hoping you won't notice their mother's uncanny resemblance to an overripe cabbage. Now picture their stern gaze as they pull out the family production ledger, detailing the last 5 generations worth of cattle sold. Romantic, right? Watching your love life immediately turn into an episode of a medieval financial documentary, so you muster the courage and attempt to charm your way into their heart. How? With the best lines you've heard from the village tavern. Your eyes shine brighter than a mouldy piece of bread. But alas, there's a high likelihood you may accidentally embarrass yourself when you call their cousin by their neighbour's name. Or worse, confuse them for that particularly ill-tempered goat. Then there's the subtle art of courtship. What's your game plan? Perhaps it involves a casual stroll near the village well, braving the risk of a bucket dropping on your foot while trying to look cool. Instead of a gentle touch of the hand, you may find yourself with a hefty slap as she casually reminds you that no touching happens before marriage. Besides, wrapping her arms round your shoulders would smack of impropriety. And let's face it, when you're marketing livestock, romance often takes a back seat. You find yourself caught in a curious mix of bargaining and stealing glances. Imagine the tension as each of you eye a few stray sheep while desperately dodging questions about the dowry. But hold your horses, and not literally, because remember, those aren't very romantic either. As you reminisce about courtship woes, surprise, medieval romance is still alive and kicking in unexpected places. Maybe you'll land a secret rendezvous in the woods with a fellow peasant, though chances are you'll still be caught red-handed by nosy neighbours or an unexpected encounter with an angry goat. The secret makeouts under the watchful eye of the moon quickly turn into who stepped on whose foot? As you tiptoe back to your respective hovels, hearts racing and suspicions rising. Finally, alas, love blossomed, or at least it emerges somehow from the fog of forced unions, the unyielding pressure of your neighbours, and the oddities of your village's precarious social norms. You might even fall in love with someone who shares your passion for gruel and your disdain for an extended forecast of endless winter. Yes, there's true romance to be found amid the dirt, chores and tedium. So as you close the chapter on medieval love stories, remember, while love may be blind, it certainly carries a hefty sack of burdens, awkward encounters, and countless conversations about livestock. And at the end of the day, if you survive the matchmaking madness, don't be afraid to dance in your hovel together. Because what better way to spin into romance than to laugh about how painfully ridiculous it all is? Now that you've donned your best wool tunic and ventured out, let's address your radiant smile, or lack thereof. Forget toothpaste. We're talking about the pure joy of decaying teeth that haven't seen a dentist since the last ice age. Why bother with dental hygiene when you can simply avoid smiling altogether? Grinning is far too risky. Imagine a mouthful of teeth that resemble a battle-worn graveyard, with each one holding its fair share of cavities, decay, and maybe even a few secrets of their own. Trust me, it's the kind of charm that will catch the eyes of any passing livestock. Ah yes, who needs romantic suitors when you've got a good chunk of stale bread stuck wedged between your molars? Much like the ancient relics of forgotten civilizations, your teeth tell a story. A history of every regrettable sweet treat you never got to enjoy because sugar was a luxury that not even the richest lords could afford without risking their digestion. Instead, you rely on coarse, rye bread that's so dense it could double as a weapon. A broken tooth on that brick-like concoction isn't just probable, it's basically guaranteed. You bite down, and suddenly, what was once a hero's breakfast becomes a tragic scene that rivals any medieval drama. Then there's the exhilarating method of cleaning your mouth. Ever tried swishing vinegar around, hoping for a minty fresh outcome? Good luck. Rinsing with vinegar just makes you smell like a decayed salad, while attempting to brush your teeth with a twig doesn't elevate your oral hygiene game either, especially when you consider it was probably an old bramble that has waged war against your gums. When you think about it, the medieval dental regimen consists of chewing on rough tree bark and somehow believing that's enough. Spoiler alert, it's not. Envision this. You finally built up the courage to flirt with that cute farmer down the lane after realizing you can no longer stand the company of your family, livestock, and various insects. And just when you're about to make your move, you're suddenly reminded that you've got something wedged in your teeth that has long since become an ecosystem of its own. A hearty sprinkle of plaque, maybe a touch of yesterday's meat if you were lucky enough to have any, adds to your charming personality. Who wouldn't want to fall in love with that? The sad truth. Medieval love is more about social status than sweet talk. And if you think smelly breath is a deal breaker today, kick that thought out the door. With halitosis as a common condition, it's less about impressing a partner and more about wondering if you can survive a conversation without passing out from your own stench. Forget exchanging sweet nothings. You're more likely to exchange sweet coughs as your respective aromas tangle in the icy air. Picture the fairy tales of long ago, where true love conquers all. The reality: a peasant's courtship is likely an endurance challenge of keeping a straight face while you both attempt to acknowledge that your dental hygiene could be classified as a horror story. But fear not, you've still got your robust laughter, right? Just kidding. The medieval idea of joy and beauty is so far removed from today's world that you'll end the day realizing every giggle feels like a gamble. One wrong chuckle and you risk exposing how many teeth have been claimed by cold nights and unyielding bread rolls. It's practically a social experiment, a fine balancing act between sharing a laugh or revealing a chasm of toothless despair. Focusing on oral health during this era becomes less an exercise in vanity and more about sheer survival and adaptation. That charming smile you grew up dreaming of in your late-night imaginings. Well, your daily reality resembles more of a wind-torn barn door than a mouth ready for the wedding chapel. And over time, as you learn to navigate these enchanting social dynamics, you'll embrace a new mantra. Beauty lies in acceptance of the gum disease. So as you swirl through the snowy landscape, smiling, or at least contemplating the mechanics of smiling, remember the tooth-related journeys of your ancestors. They trudged on, toothless yet full of spirit, each festivity a reminder that even the simplest joys can go hand in hand with the sincerest sadness. And yes, perhaps even serve as a social commentary on what it means to really live. So, embrace your medieval reality with pride and a cautious grimace, because even in the teeth of adversity, you've got a wild adventure ahead. Have you felt a fever coming on? Well, you don't, because in the medieval Ice Age, every cough sounds smooth compared to living with the awful grip of the plague. The medieval medical world believes magic and prayer are superior to medicine, and you're left navigating through remedies that might make you feel worse than the illness itself. Imagine being so sick that the local chaplain has a better diagnosis of your ailments than actual doctors, whose medical proficiency primarily focuses on bleeding you out or offering unsolicited lectures on repentance. Everything is perfectly medieval. As you lie in bed wrapped in itchy woolen blankets you probably stole from your neighbour's half-dead sheep, you ponder the crazy remedies people swear by. Shall we start with holistic treatments? Oh yes, your town herbalist might suggest concocting a soothing tea from grubs, snails, and a few odd herbs she's convinced you magically need to drink. Or how about your favourite neighbourhood barber surgeon? He's ready to cure you with a proper bloodletting. His idea of medical treatment is putting your frail body through Caribbean conditions, where the more blood he collects, the better you'll apparently feel. Because hey, Who needs blood when you can be anemic while battling a virus? Not that your options are exactly savoury. The common folk remedy involves bubbling potions that smell like a swamp caught in a thunderstorm, essentially an alcohol bath that offers a thin line between stupor and sanity. You do wonder if drinking half a jar of fermented cabbage juice might actually cause you to hallucinate, leading you to believe you're communicating with the spirits of the ancestors, mocking your very existence and poor life decisions. Oh, but cleansing the body is the key, they claim. How delightful it would be to religiously embrace the idea of purging yourself. Laxatives become the order of the day. While you may be thrilled at the opportunity to whip out your excellent inner comedian, the reality is you're stuck running to the loo more often than you'd like. The only competition are the neighbours engaging in similar cleansing. Thus you'll quickly realise that in a world without privacy, your business is everyone's entertainment. Worse yet, how do you handle the social stigma? Because if you start wheezing or blowing your nose, strongest gossip spreader in town will stake claim to your ailments, like you just sneezed in sacred lands. Folks will think you're marked by God, perhaps as a punishment for the time your pig snuck into the Lord's orchard. Enjoy the thought of being the social pariah while you're hoping to simply recover in peace. Spoiler alert, you won't. Thankfully, your very supportive family, who'd pin the warning signs as the universe sending its people to cleanse the sinners, is fully prepared for your not-so-grand departure from this world. It gets worse if you catch the plague, the bubo, at which point you'll sport some very sinister, unsightly bumps that, quite frankly, replace any prior insecurities you had about your wardrobe. These swellings pop in with a bang and leave you feeling like a flailing bag of potatoes. Of course, the brighter side is that they rivaled medieval fashion trends, making you a disgusting fashionista like no other. Those swollen, festering lumps become your trademark, and that's before you find a comfortable way to lie down. Spoiler alert, lying down exacerbates the swelling, and you'll be forced into breaking a deal with yourself just to avoid the agony. As the daily church bells ring, marking another day of existence with the plague, at least you hold on to the hope that staring at the aged ceiling might show you an epiphany, unlike your earthly struggles. Perhaps the divine can offer some advice on what to do with all that pain. In a burst of inspiration, you decide it's wise to pray to whichever saint governs the maladies. Meanwhile, your cough persists, sounding like a raven with a death wish echoing through the hovel. In conclusion, surviving the medieval Ice Age's plague season isn't just a test of physical stamina, it's a hilariously torturous journey through fear, social stigma, and a haunting lesson in the depths of medieval medicine, or lack thereof. So, next time you think your flu at home is challenging, just remember that in the medieval Ice Age, a snuffle could lead to a raucous farewell gathering, and your grand exit could involve how much of a show you put on for your family and friends. The thrill of drama was alive and well, even if you weren't. Time's up. And no, we're not talking about party time. A funeral during this period is less of a celebration of life and more of the developer's last chapter in your tragic story. It often resembles an old horror scene from those oversaturated fairy tale reruns. You learn quickly that no matter how grand your funeral was planned, death still requires a budget. Let's face it, in an age where your best option might be a hastily dug pit behind the hovel, options are limited. For peasants, lavish send-offs are strictly reserved for those whose status allows them to be remembered fondly, while the common folk are often unceremoniously tossed aside like last week's bread. Picture it. A sombre gathering centred around a half-rotted coffin that has probably seen more plague than pine. The family, dressed in their finest yet still drab wool, huddles close together, trying to ignore the overwhelming scent of musty earth mixed with the crisp chill of approaching winter air. They stand around, either weeping softly or murmuring prayers to a god whose attention feels as distant as the sun in mid-January. There's no room for theatrics here. You're immediately reminded that any emotional display could easily turn into a skirmish over who had the better relationship with the deceased. Yes, even in death, petty grievances reign supreme. Among the mourners, you might recognise a few familiar faces, like your Aunt Gertrude, who somehow forgot to wash her hair before showing up and insists on doing the weeping in such a dramatic fashion that it puts Shakespearean tragedies to shame. And let's not forget your cousin Morty, who, in a tragic twist of irony, is sitting on a barrel of ale, doing his best to offer the dead a toast. You scratch your head, wondering if this really is a celebration of life, or just a gathering of people who are one moody chicken away from a full-blown civil war. And what's that? A funeral pyre? Ha! If only. While elites may enjoy their pyramid-shaped monuments after kicking the bucket, for you, it's about practicality. Funeral costs sink deep into the pockets of the living, while the dead usually end up in a hastily dug trench. On the rare occasion that a peasant does get laid to rest in a graveyard, it's most likely because they knew someone, a mere acquaintance perhaps, who had a half-decent plot of land left over. And if the earth has been too frozen to dig, well, guess what? You may just end up wrapped in burlap and left in the barn to await freezing temperatures. A real show of respect and love, right? As the casket lowers itself into the ground, you might hear a few sniffles, but the atmosphere is far from muted acceptance of the cycle of life. There are hushed conversations about who will inherit what and whether anyone's going to bother to bring food after the body's been buried. You can already see Grandma Alice eyeing that loaf of stale bread like it's the Holy Grail. Meanwhile, the priest, bless his heart, is attempting to bless the soul with a sermon that sounds painfully similar to last week's, from zeal to exhaustion in just 5 minutes flat. Mourners may join in on memories of the departed, exchanging stories about how he never could hold his liquor during market days, when he delighted in telling anyone who'd listen about that one time he won a chicken in a game of dice. Surely those fond tales provide some levity, quickly shifting gears as discussions inevitably lead to who will take over the farm. Conversation that sounds a lot like funeral bingo, complete with the grim realization that life must go on, perhaps with a bit of moaning for emphasis. At the end of the day, though, as clouds gather and shadows grow longer, everyone gathers for a round of bread and ale, not much else to be had, quietly contemplating your recently departed friend's legacy. Was it wealth? Friendship? Proficiency in hunting? The pesky neighbour who won't go away? The real truth is that, by the time your rickety coffin plunges into the ground, all that truly remains are ghostly memories and possibly a few unreturned favours, clinging tightly to the hearts of those left behind. As the sun dips below the horizon, marks another day spent in the chilling embrace of the medieval ice age, you realise one thing: your funeral, even if poorly planned, poorly executed, and possibly awfully remembered, might just be the best chance you have at a bittersweet spectacle of existence in these bone-numbing times. So next time you think you're unfortunate, remember, at least you're not having your life reduced to a ceremony marked by mud, tears, and a touch of uncomfy nostalgia. Think nature walks will save the day? Ha! From crocodiles to freezing rivers, you're not just trying to survive the cold, you're picking fights with all of nature, risking life, limb and sandwiches just to attend a simple gathering in the great outdoors. And what could possibly go wrong when you're faced with raging storms and rabid squirrels? As you shuffle through the woods, trying not to slip on the frozen ground, you will quickly discover that nature isn't just beautiful, it's a ruthless battlefield. Each step feels like a gamble. Is that a deer hoof print or the work of a bear who forgot his manners? You squint into the distance, staring down that suspicious shadow. Was it the ghost of a long-lost nobleman, or simply a tree branch casting a mischievous silhouette? You can't be too careful, especially when a wily squirrel looks like it's plotting something sinister, perhaps in cahoots with a local weasel gang. You wouldn't want to become breakfast for something that spends most of its day stealing your nuts, and no, not the delicious kind. You finally reach the river, a flowing ribbon of ice and mischief. The first thing you notice, it's frozen over. Ice, however, is a mere suggestion during the medieval ice age, and you know if you misstep, that thin veneer won't be there to catch you. What's your first move? Dive in and chill like a medieval mermaid? Or just tiptoe cautiously, trying to channel your inner ice dancer? Either way, you're facing a precarious dance with death, much like your morning commute to the fields. Now, assume you're daring enough to continue. The moment you step onto that ice, the chill snakes up your spine, whispering frostbite in a haunting tone. Your heart races as each footfall threatens to send you tumbling into icy waters, which would surely be the end of your plan to grab a pint with your peasant pals later. You've heard tales of so-called invincible peasants, but at this moment, your instincts scream louder than the church bells calling you to mass. And let's not forget about the wild animals. Sure, you've heard a story about the wise old boar, but let's be real. There's nothing wise about a creature that could easily end your existence over a game of who gets to eat first. Do you really want to be caught hunting for treasure in a field already marked with animal dung? No. So as you continue to trek through the rugged terrain, they seem to laugh at you as they patrol their territory like royal guards who've had one too many cups of ale. After narrowly avoiding the slippery slopes, you come across a sudden gust of wind that throws dirt in your face. Yes, that's right. Mother Nature isn't just cold, she's feisty. Brace yourself. The angry gusts whip through the trees like a peasant trying to outrun a tax collector. You squint, fumble, and wipe your face with a wool-covered hand, only to realise you're making yourself an easy target for a flock of crows eyeing your lunch. Panic sets in as you realise that your prized sandwich, despite its burgeoning reputation as a culinary delight in a world ruled by pottage, is now on everyone's menu. Will you fight them off with assertive hand gestures and poorly executed scare tactics? You learn on the spot that no amount of arm flailing will scare a bird that's been around long enough to have strong opinions on your choice of fillings. But hey, nature don't give up, and neither should you. Just as you contemplate giving up on this whole outdoor adventure nonsense, a somewhat fairy tale-like moment happens. Yes, a cute little deer pops out of the underbrush. Surely this creature's sweetness should lighten your freezing heart. But give it a second. Before you can revel in its beauty, it kicks up a trail of mud and scampers off. Nature offers you no breaks, only laughter at your expense. Finally, as your legs start to feel like frozen chicken legs stuffed into your wool tunic, you decide it's time for a hot drink. Hot being a relative term when it involves water heated over a smoky fire. You long for a warm drink, hoping it might take the edge off the biting chill. And here is the kicker. After navigating all those nature-related hurdles and avoiding just about every potential injury, you find out that it was simply another day in the life. You'll survive, and perhaps you'll even emerge with more stories than you bargained for. Because let's face it, surviving the great outdoors in the medieval ice age may not come with cosy camping chairs and perfectly flavoured hot cocoa, but those eerie moments of threats and challenges will surely have you laughing as you sit around the fire with your fellow peasants, sharing tales of threats from crows and old boars, while thanking your luck for not wind up frozen into the river instead. Let's talk medieval invention, arguably the most notorious time of creativity. Whether that's the clever invention of the wheelbarrow that turned into 1,000 awkward attempts at loading stuff, or those useful wooden shoes that squeak loudly at every turn, let's just say you quickly learn that convenience wasn't really part of the medieval vernacular. In fact, if you ever pondered how to make your life more complicated, then congratulations. Living in medieval Europe was your golden ticket. Walking down your dirt street, you can hear that delightful sound of clunky wooden clogs. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Why did anyone think that strapping a couple of blocks of wood to your feet was a good idea? One slip on a muddy pathway, and you're tumbling down like a sack of potatoes, taking half the neighbourhood's chickens with you. They say practice makes perfect, but any time spent walking in those shoes feels more like an endurance test designed by a rascally cobbler who had far too much time on his hands. You might start to question whether it was about making transport easier, or simply crafting a complex system of public embarrassment. And what's that, you ask? A wheelbarrow. The very concept of a wheelbarrow seems to promise ease of transport, but in true medieval spirit, it quickly descends into chaos. That single wheel becomes a gladiator in a wrestling ring, determined to jump left while you're steadfastly pushing right. You can't tell whether you're carrying firewood or launching an impromptu game of medieval dodgeball. Of course, if you're lucky enough to find one without a broken wheel, you'll probably be tempted to fix it. And should that wheel go missing, or worse, disengage entirely, your back will serve as the next unfortunate transportation method. Because why not carry all your supplies while you defeat the very laws of ergonomics? Speaking of historic inventions, consider the innovative artistry of the medieval plough, designed to help you cultivate your crops, but more accurately serving to remind you of your back pain. Seriously, if you ever wanted to experience the truest essence of soil, as in crawling through it, you could always hop onto one of those contraptions. As you manoeuvre this beast across the field, you might just end up creating more furrows of despair than rows of lovely onions and potatoes. But isn't it comforting to know that someone somewhere invented an object designed purely to cause you endless physical suffering, while somehow expecting that you'd feel grateful for it? And what better way to assess your worth than the invention of the communal oven? That splendid piece of engineering that promised to make baking bread much easier, but often delivered disappointment moulded with anxiety. Does the bread come out half-baked? You bet. It's a fun communal experience, until you discover that the neighbour's dog is about to commit culinary sabotage. Why share one oven when you can share everyone's woes over undercooked dough? It's like hosting a dinner party where your bread ends up looking like an ancient artifact you found in a back basement. Hard, discoloured, and contemplating the meaning of existence. Don't even get me started on medieval hygiene innovations, or should I say, lack thereof. You'll encounter plenty of fascinating contraptions meant to scrub dirt off bodies, but the reality is often more about resembling a torturous medieval torture device. Could you wash yourself without risking a sprained ankle? Well, as long as you managed to fill a tub with water and pray no one else jumped in before you. Bathing was, of course, considered taboo according to the general populace. After all, who knew that opening your pores might invite disease, and the result? A society that glorified the art of living amidst layers of dirt and mystery, all while being able to proudly claim, "I'm free-spirited." Talk about embracing your inner, unwashed human. So there you have it. The medieval period, rife with innovations, offers a unique lens into humanity's relationship with failure and convenience. Despite all the madness, the oh-so-crunchy irony lies just beneath the surface. While you stumble about in your wooden shoes, bumble your way through fields freshened by peculiar farming contraptions, and settle for stale bread while sharing your evening stew with unfortunate neighbours, know this. Somehow, within all the chaos and firmly entrenched age-old miseries, the medieval spirit shines on. Because if history teaches you anything, It's that even the worst conveniences lead to extraordinary tales, sometimes best told around a pot of pottage that's even older than the concept of cleanliness. Why do you feel sad? Because by the end of this saga, you'll find the inevitability of death always looms larger with the bleakness of every icy winter. The only chance of succeeding at life lies in either avoiding sickness or relying on the softings who share their great advice when you're dirt-stretched. Let's say everyone looks a bit too comfortable with their existential crises, huh? Each morning you wake up in the medieval hovel you begrudgingly call home under a rotting thatched roof, only to be greeted by the chill of despair that seems to seep into your bones faster than any rat can scuttle by. No surprise there. In the medieval world, life's joys often come at the expense of creeping dread. As you prepare to venture out and face the day, it hits you. The harshness of winter isn't just a metaphor for your life. It's a physical encapsulation of the very real threat of death that lingers like those mouldy breadcrumbs stubbornly refusing to leave your hovel. In late medieval Europe, death isn't treated like an unfortunate but inevitable part of life. No, around here, it's the Grim Reaper dressed as your roommate, constantly reminding you that one bad meal or a chilly night without a blanket could be the beginning of your mortal descent into the great abyss. And speaking of bad meals, the food you'll prepare today could very well dictate the outcome of your overall health. Pottage doesn't seem so bad until you realise the mystery of its ingredient list might include that dubious rat you named Chester, whom you thought had run away 2 weeks ago. This question haunts you. Am I putting good food in my body? Or am I just fooling myself with a bowl of nutritional Russian roulette? With no seal of FDA approval and no food safety regulations, cooking in the wintertime is less about actually nourishing yourself and more about embracing the adventurous spirit of living on the edge, a little too close to the dead centre for comfort. And if you do succumb to some bone-rattling illness, forget about healthcare. Your solutions come from your neighbour Georgette, known for her unconventional remedies involving questionable herbs and a terrifyingly interactive relationship with the local insects. Oh, you're feeling sick? Well, did you try drinking a concoction made from water boiled with flower petals? Or maybe you should just take a moment to hang out with those flies buzzing around your hovel, as they possess magical properties after all. But wait, there's more. If folk medicine doesn't do the trick, you'll quickly turn to your good old friend fear. Fear of the plague hanging over your head like an unwanted cloak of doom. You see, unlike your fashionable tunic, the plague is inescapable, like your eternally messy neighbour who refuses to bathe. Any coughing or sneezing will have people eyeing you like you're a walking grave, unsure whether they should run for their lives or toss you a palliative potion. The medieval take on social distancing is far less about personal space and far more about avoiding an early trip to the local graveyard. As you go about your day, remember the perks of being a peasant. Quick visits to crowded market stalls, where your chances of contracting something life-threatening are magnified as you jostle with all manner of people, livestock, and, of course, an unseemly number of unwashed hands. Give a nod to your fate as you endure the sniffles and chills, but be careful not to take anything too seriously. After all, mortality has been a resident of the medieval house long before you picked up a pitchfork, and it'll still be there long after you've traded in your wool tunic for a shroud. At the end of the day, when the moon rises and casts its silver glow across the snow-covered rooftops, what remains is your stubborn spirit and unyielding will to laugh in the face of fate. Even when surrounded by the dampness of your hovel, you take comfort in the idea that existence, despite its numerous trials and tribulations, is fundamentally a shared struggle. Gatherings grow richer by echoing tales of bravery or hilariously ridiculous misadventures, of times when ruin felt inevitable, yet survival prevailed. So, as the night takes over and you blanket yourself in that slimy wool. Remember, while death may seem like the inevitable conclusion, laughter and the occasional pottage-filled memory make the ride worth enduring. After all, in the end, every story deserves a touch of absurdity, a dash of humour, and a taste of triumph, especially when that victory against cold nights and very real rats keeps you alive for another grim day. Feel frozen? That's because the medieval ice age doesn't do comforts. With one layer of wool somewhere around your skin, it's tough to understand why hypothermia wasn't an ongoing theme, when every layer you break out of is tied tightly to misery. Finding warmth is a lifelong pursuit melted down under all the frost. Yes, quite the chilly debacle. You might be wearing the latest trending gear of the era, a wool tunic that's part insulation, part emotional baggage, and all around unpleasant. Let's be honest, it's less a fashion statement and more an agreement with despair. Did you ever think, hey, I want to wear something that smells like livestock and feels like it's been used to scrub the floor? Didn't think so. But here we are. There's no texting your friend about a cosy night-in hug, just your scratchy wool tunic and the emotional warmth of knowing you have a whole hovel full of people sharing their body odour with you. And let's not forget the very real possibility that those tunics come with a lively cast of fleas. You probably didn't want a full-blown insect farm in your clothes as an accessory, but here we are, making the best out of what medieval life offers. A fine combination of misery and itchy surprise. With farming impossible during the long winter, those miles of wool are probably a little grimier than you remember, since washing isn't part of your life plan. Sorry, outdoor bathing isn't a thing here. You avoid the ponds because they resemble something out of a haunted tale, a stagnant nightmare filled with frozen fish, the ghosts of bad decisions, and possibly a dead goat. Did anyone care to invent soap? Now why bother? You're perfectly fine if a bit chilly, covered in layers of sweat that, if we're honest, might just keep you warmer than any actual washing could. As you step outside in a feeble attempt to bask in the scorching sunlight, read, it's still freezing. Your only protection lies in an overgrown scarf and a pair of shoes with all the support of a hastily made pancake. You might as well be wearing flip-flops for the level of protection those leather rags offer. With every step you can feel guilt follow closely behind. You're not buying new boots because as a peasant, you're definitely at the bottom of society's caring hierarchy. Can't afford to see the kindly cobbler, and the most luxurious shoe you can muster is a patched-up cloth that now serves a more decorative purpose. And let's talk about layering. When winter arrives, it's not just a coat season. It's a whole experience of convincing yourself that 3 tunics under your wool cloak is normal, and that walking like a balled-up raccoon is indeed what it means to be fashionable. People might mistake you for a walking beanbag chair, but hey, at least you're safe from the elements. Who needs a streamlined silhouette when you can rock the "I've been hibernating all winter and I'm proud of it" look? Did we mention socks? Those incredibly rare pieces of foot-warming goodness you can rarely locate. You may find yourself re-wearing some that have survived multiple wash cycles since the last plague. They often offer a unique odour that you only hope keeps you warm. The medieval equivalent of toe socks living a glorious life intertwined with your toes. And what about that fashionable touch called underwear? The optional closet addition that is definitely missing from your life. Your medieval self is saving the world one misgiven itch at a time, while embracing the glorious option of being going commando. Why do laundry when you can just let your body odours intertwine? Yes, friends, embrace the stink. Despite all these woes, the ultimate cosy retreat is simply huddling together for warmth in your crowded, poorly insulated hovel, accompanied by your relatives, screaming goats, and a few rats, who, let's be honest, have become your lively companions. On the plus side, All those woolly tunics may not have won any fashion awards, but they surely keep out the biting chill. Maybe it's a good thing life doesn't come with runways. So, while you're rubbing that itchy wool on your back like a seasoned pro, remember that in the medieval Ice Age, survival was life's true luxury. Who, after all, needed hot cocoa or fluffy pyjamas when you had a freezing plateau of wool wrapped around your feet and a family potpourri of personalities to keep you entertained and prepped for the next Ice Age spillover? Staying warm wasn't just a challenge, it was a robust experience in the bitter cold of medieval magic. Ah, your lovely house, a hovel that feels more like a designated jail cell for all the rats threatening your supper. With a leaking roof and curtains of straw, coming home definitely doesn't feel like a cosy retreat. You've officially reached the point of deeming maintaining a home impossible, and if the rats could offer you a collective resignation letter, you'd probably sign it right away. Welcome to the medieval version of domestic life, where a roof doesn't just keep the elements out. It also doubles as a multi-generational breeding ground for lice, bedbugs, and an inexplicable mix of pungent odours. As you step inside, the first thing that hits you is the smell. It's a melange, a delightful blend of damp straw, last week's soup, and a hint of something that was once. Well, you're not quite sure what that was. Your home is a single room shared with your family, livestock, and an assortment of insects that have become your unwelcome cupbearers. You thought privacy was overrated. Try nesting with your 2 cousins, a goat, and the lingering aroma of whatever Uncle Hubert knocked over during last night's midnight snack raid. Every corner of the room is a DIY project waiting to happen, or a health hazard in the making. Your living space is elegantly designed with a strategic open concept that allows no form of personal space whatsoever. Naturally, you need to arrange sleeping arrangements around a few sleeping goats. Good luck trying to convince them that your corner of the hay is off limits. Spoiler alert, they won't listen. You find yourself resting on a low pile of rotting straw, which somehow seems softer than your neighbour's rock-hard pottage. But it's also a game of roulette as you try to dodge both livestock feet and the occasional scuttling rat. On the bright side, at least these complaints serve as free entertainment. Your kitchen area, if one could even call it that, consists of a cauldron resting over a fire pit, constantly trying to boil water that smells like it's been sourced from the nearest swamp. Cooking is an art form well beyond your skill. Even if the ingredients don't get the culinary treatment they deserve, your family will forage together, repurposing yesterday's leftovers into today's slightly more unrecognisable mush. Each meal is a fascinating exploration in trust, or a challenge of survival, as you wonder if what you're about to eat was possibly alive yesterday, or in a neighbouring hovel last week. The best part of your hovel is its exquisite insulation, or lack thereof. Medieval winters have a unique cruelty, and your house feels like it was built to encourage hardy ancestors to brave the elements instead of finding comfort indoors. The thatched roof, perfect in the summer for letting in cool breezes, slowly becomes a shelter for icicles in winter as you contemplate the joy of sub-zero temperatures while surrounded by your relatives. Forget blankets. Most of your family sleeps in whatever ragged wool they wore during the day. You're essentially living in a very charming igloo, one that might collapse at any minute. Yet somehow, amid this swirling chaos, a kind of camaraderie grows. Shared misery builds bonds that last through freezing winter mornings and enchanted evenings filled with the gossip of neighbours and the gossiping sheep. Each night is a raucous karaoke competition that involves the whole family belting tunes, mostly out of a desire to drown out the noise of battling rats, while finding temporary solace in the shared misery of being alive together. The harmony of squeaks and bleats is almost a comforting background score to your everyday struggles, as if your hovel hosts the world's most dysfunctional musical. The living conditions may be dire, Your roof may leak, and your supper might be a stew that tastes suspiciously of something that may have attacked you a few days ago. But these hardships don't break the spirit. Instead, they shape it. That's the funny part. You realise that despite the filth and discomfort, this little hovel, this barely standing structure, serves as a bastion of survival, of stories shared, laughter echoing, and bonds forming amidst the frost. So, welcome home. By the end of your day, whether in laughter or tears, you'll find that your hovel is indeed a hub of chaos, and that chaotic essence is what makes it feel just a little bit more like home than anything else could. You can't make this stuff up, and honestly, where else would you rather be? It's not just a living condition, it's a masterclass in endurance. When engaging in survival more than thriving, you'll finally master the art of meekly accepting the throes of suffering. You'll learn resilience, and by the end of your journey, you won't just survive, you'll find ways to turn any mundane day into a victory worth celebrating in your winter hovel. Picture this. It's a particularly crisp morning. Frost laces the windows like a feeble artist's attempt at glass blowing, and you jolted awake from a night spent jostling with the vermin that seem more comfortable than you are. But hey, as a peasant, there are few things left to do but to embrace the absurdity of your life. What irony, you ask? Irony is knowing that when snow piles up outside like a fluffy white prison, your biggest concern is not the relative comfort of the frozen hay underneath you, but the journey to the communal fire where warmth lives for a few fleeting moments. On good days, you huddle over the pit, hands wrapped around a pot of pottage that's probably outlived several of your relatives. Yes, the smells wafting from that pot are truly a treat for the senses, like a tantalizing mix of desperation and a slight hint of whatever hasn't yet succumbed to rot. Today's special? It could be last week's ingredients, taking their sweet time to devolve into an existential soup that fills your belly in negotiations with your stomach. But let's not forget the sunny side of life, or the glimmers of hope that might penetrate through the relentless grey skies. Because stepping beyond the mundane is essential for keeping your sanity intact. Making a small fire, a victory, managing to keep it going for more than 10 minutes, an Olympic event. Each flickering ember is a beacon of accomplishment, inviting your fellow peasants to gather around like moths to a flame, or just to gawk at your remarkable skill in not completely failing the communal cooking competition. Let's take a moment to reflect on the wisdom you're accumulating. Survival is about community and creativity. You'll begin to look at your hovel not as a prison, but as a stage for a variety of culinary experiments. Remember that unidentifiable root you dug up last week? Well, that awkward potato-shaped mass could be tomorrow's dinner. Give those crispy edges a good polish and fry them over the fire. Congratulations, you've just transformed the local weeds into a delectable delicacy. Neighbours will talk about your innovative recipes long after they've taken their last cheese board. As the dark nights roll in, you begin to confront the eternal reality of boredom and the need for distraction. Without Netflix, TikTok, or even Wi-Fi, how did humanity survive? It turns out your medieval social life lies just outside the door. Gather round, ladies and gents, for the nocturnal storytelling sessions in front of the fireplace. You'll swap tall tales of giant rats, missed blessings, and emboldened adventures, ones that may or may not have got more fantastic with every retelling. Even if you were simply feeding the chickens, suddenly that moment transforms into a heroic battle with heroic proportions. And if you think about your days filled with hard labour and scrapwood fires, you'll soon come to realise joy can be found in the darkest corners. Remember that time your hand slipped while harvesting the last of how much would you give to never revisit that day potatoes. The triumph over mishaps becomes your lifeline. Laughter fills the hovel as your mishap turns into the self-inflicted comedy routine showcasing just how resilient you've become. The diverse skills you hone, whether in food sourcing or humorous storytelling, create a balance. But this cold existence also teaches you about a much deeper lesson: acceptance. Accept that winter will last longer than you ever thought possible. Accept that food scarcity is a reality, and learning to thrive might mean being a little flexible with your expectations. You start finding joy in the little wins, whether it's wrinkling your nose at last night's dinner or simply playing hide and seek with the shadows of the random rodents crawling about your feet. Those moments, even in their discomfort, become creatively warm spaces where you celebrate survival. So, as yet another snowstorm rattles the roof of your frozen abode, remember, finding light in a world often overshadowed by sorrow and suffering is no small feat. You are the warrior of your hovel, the victor in the face of biting winds and solid blocks of food resembling last week's horror stories. By adapting to your surroundings, you'll emerge stronger and delightfully resourceful, ready to face the next ice age with laughter as your shield. Now, if only winter could finally take a hint and scatter away. Just let me know when you'd like to move on to the outro.